is true? If so, have you cooperated with these inquiries? How's that for question one of a confirmation hearing?
Yeah, and if he goes to the confirmation hearing, imagine him sitting there when they get to the next follow-up question, which is going to be, did you receive immunity for your testimony? Because if he really did speak to the grand jury, which of course he did, and we know that his documents, his emails have come up in the guilty plea of another Trump campaign official, obviously the question of immunity has been raised around Sam Clovis's cooperation and testimony. The idea that you then confirm him to a senior administration position while he's getting immunity, potentially, for his testimony in a criminal matter, in a counterintelligence matter, yeah, doesn't feel like much of a prediction that this was going to fall apart, but I think you predicted it correctly.
And the position he's been nominated for is generally referred to as the chief scientist of the Agriculture Department. So all those science questions that the Democrats on the Agriculture Committee had, they've all been thrown away. But it's for the hearing that's never going to happen, right? We're not going to get that lucky.
You know, the Trump administration is on the hook for having named a talk show host to be the top scientist in the Agriculture Department. I'm a former talk show host. I believe it's a kind of science, but I wouldn't expect to be nominated to that kind of job myself. Yeah, this started off as a mess, and it's getting worse.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Well, today, President Trump met with his cabinet. And as he looked around the room, he was looking at the group who Steve Bannon is telling friends might vote to remove him from office using the 25th Amendment. That's according to a new report. And John Kelly, the question for John Kelly tonight is, has he lost the benefit of the doubt about what he meant when he called Congresswoman Frederica Wilson an empty barrel, and what he meant when he called Robert E. Lee an honorable man?
This investigation poses an existential threat to the Trump presidency.